Welcome to the Genealogy Radio Show, the radio show that's keeping you in the loop. And this week's show is all about surnames of Ireland. We're starting this series concentrating on particular surnames and what interest they have for the family history researcher. We have two guests on studio today, and that's Aisling O'Brien and Michael Reynolds. And they're going to be talking all about the O'Brien and the Reynolds surname. They're peculiar or particular to the Munster and the Connacht provinces. So we'll start with Aisling and welcome Aisling to the Genealogy Radio Show. What have you got to tell us about the O'Briens?
Well, I'll start with the provinces. I'll start with the families of the province of Munster. Munster as a province is the original home of many Irish families. The families were broken up into different clans, but it is the Dalcassians that is of particular interest to us today, as it is from this branch that the O'Briens originated. The Dalcassians were famed for being the tribe to produce brown brew, and were recognised as the clan to run North Munster. Some of the chief families of the sept were the O'Briens, the Lysacks, the MacArthurs, the MacBrodens, the MacClancys, the MacConroys, the MacCurtins, the MacDonalds, the MacInrays, the MacGraths, the MacMahons, the McNamaras, the O'Hearns, the O'Brodies, the O'Caseys, O'Cashans, O'Considines, O'Davrin, O'Day, O'Grady, O'Hanrahan, O'Noonan, O'Sheehan, O'Splan, O'Healy, O'Heap, O'Heffernan, O'Hockey, and O'Hogan. Now, the O'Brien surname, translated to O'Brien in Irish, or Niverine for the females in the audience, is one of the most common in Ireland. The name has numerous variations, ranging from one such as O'Brien, which has simply swapped the I for a Y, to those such as MacBrien, which seems like a complete mutation of the original title. Other variations include O'Brien, 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 O'Brient, O'Brien, 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 O'Bryant, Brian, Breen, Briand, Brines, Brine, with an I-N-E, Brion, MacBrien, and MacBrien. The bulk of the names in Ireland are of Celtic origin, and the O'Brien is no different. The O prefix is a staple of the Celtic names, though in many cases families drop the extra vowel in later years and then added it again. In some areas the name has been anglicised to Breen, from the Irish Brean, meaning moisture or drop. This clan can trace their roots to Knocktofer, Kilkenny, but migrated to Wexford in the 12th and 13th century. All of those who share the O'Brien surname or a variation of it have been regaled with stories of how they are descendants of the great High King of Ireland, Brian Brew. The O'Briens can claim to Bran Finn, son of Lochta, king of Munster, and an uncle to Brian Brew. Brian Brew is one of the many legendary figures to emerge from Irish history. His name is of particular interest as it is generally accepted as being a nickname, allegedly derived from his habit of collecting tributes from the minor rulers of Ireland. These tributes often came in the form of cattle, lending the bow to his name. It is believed that in 976, Brian Brew gained control of the Dalgash tribe, or the Dalcassians, based in Limerick, and just 2 years later killed the King of Munster, taking the title for himself. The man's exploits seem almost mythic, as we understand that he went on to defeat the rulers of the other four provinces, including the Vikings, until he claimed the throne as the Ard Rí. His remarkable career as High King of Ireland came to an abrupt end at the Battle of Clontarf in 1014. His death was not in vain, though, as he did manage to subdue the Vikings, and Ireland was finally united under a single leader. Understanding the extraordinary history of Brian Brew, it is little wonder that so many are eager to include him in their genealogy. In relation to the location of the O'Briens, we are known to have a strong presence in Munster, most likely due to Brian Brew's initial presence there. In fact, his direct descendants can be located in Clare to this day. Conor Brown is the 32nd descendant of the Ard Rí and is the current holder of the title of the Prince of Thomond. Due to the fact that the O'Briens managed to retain their wealth and power throughout the years of occupation, Conor O'Brien also holds the title of Barony of Inchiquin. He is the 18th Baron Inchiquin and is recognised as a direct descendant of the first Baron, Murtagh O'Brien, who acquired the title in 1543. The O'Briens were rulers of Brawny, a territory near Athlone in counties Offaly and Westmeath. They were powerful in the Middle Ages, however they lost their power and the name was altered, and many in the area are now found as O'Briens. The surname is now quite common in North Connacht, County Fermanagh, and as I stated, has a particularly strong presence in Munster. There are a number of branches throughout the province, including the O'Briens of Harlow in Tipperary, the O'Briens of Waterford, the O'Briens of Ara in North Tip, and the O'Briens of Limerick. The O'Brien name itself is problematic in that it's difficult to pin down its meaning. In its simplest form, it does mean the descendant of Brian, as in Brian Brew. Many assume that it also means exalted one or his eminence, coming from the word Brion, which means hill or high place in the Celtic ancestor of Welsh. As I mentioned before, Breen variations has connections to Brian, which roughly translates to Meister in Irish. There is also some argument that the name has connections to Bran, meaning raven. The O'Brien coat of arms is also rather interesting. In its simplest form, it portrays 3 lions, symbolic of the family's history with royalty, against a red backdrop. In some variations, one might find an arm emerging from the clouds with a sword. This is representative of the clan's otherworldly source of power. Some depictions show a knight's helmet sitting atop the crest, and the lines appear to be the sole constant. Though it cannot be argued that we get our name from Brian Brew, O'Brien as a surname was not used until Donogh Carb O'Brien, son of the King of Munster, Donal Moore, who reigned from 1168 to 1194. The accounts of Donogh Carb O'Brien are conflicting. Some argue that he was the eldest of Donal Moore's brood, while other sources insist that this was not the case. Though his position on the family tree is in dispute, it is generally a recognised fact that he was the first to assume the surname. The Carbrook in his name was derived from his time spent in the High Carb Ava. He erected a castle in Clanroad near Innis, and was his branches of eventual heirs that perpetuated the name throughout the country, and today the name is widespread along the Emerald Isle. In the 1864 Griffiths valuation, it notes that there were 649 O'Briens in Limerick, 511 in Clare, 455 in Tipperary, and 141 in Waterford. These figures are rather telling. The largest cluster of O'Briens was found in Limerick and Clare. This is not surprising considering the fact that the Dalgashian tribe were based in Clare, and the O'Briens are one of the main sects of this tribe. Their presence in Waterford is also to be expected, as they were expelled in the early years. From the birth records between 1864 and 1913, we know that 1,030 O'Briens were born in Dublin. This number proves that the O'Briens migrated to Dublin after the famine. There are 1,240 O'Briens in Dublin South, 1,581 in Limerick. This is the highest concentration of family in the area. In Neenah, 319, and in Waterford, 254. In relation to the Roman Catholic households, there was a high concentration in Ballygary, in Ballybricken, in Clogheen, Dunas, Church, which is located near Killaloe, Dublin City, St Andrews and St Agatha, Dublin St Lawrence O'Toole, St Nicholas, St Mary's Pro Cathedral, Killaloe, Kilmurray, Bricken, Limerick City, St Michael's. This is another way of showing that where the family were and how they eventually moved. Some famous O'Briens would include William Smith O'Brien, 1803 to 1864, a founder of the Young Irelander movement, who played a major role in the Rising of 1848. Dermot O'Brien was this O'Brien's grandson. He was a leading portrait artist in Dublin for almost 40 years. Kate O'Brien then, from 1897 to 1954, was a novelist in the early years of the Irish Free State. The O'Brien surname, though, is not unique to Ireland. Today, O'Briens can be found worldwide. America, for example, invited a cluster of the clan in the second half of the 18th century. Mars O'Brien came to Machias in Maine, and his son, Captain Jeremiah O'Brien, might be familiar to some of you as an early American hero of the Revolutionary War or the War of Independence, which was from April 19, 1775 to September 3, 1783. In 1775, he captured a British armed schooner off Machias in a battle that became known as the Battle of Machias, and this was the first naval engagement of the war. His son Jeremiah then went on to run a lumber manufacturing and shipping business, but also was very active in the local politics of the time. Another notable immigrant from Ireland, who arrived on the shores of the Land of Opportunity was Hugh O'Brien, who moved with his parents to Boston when he was 5. In 1885, he made history when he was elected as mayor in the city that had previously been run exclusively by native-born Protestants. When speaking of famous O'Briens from America, we would be at fault if we failed to mention Conan O'Brien, the adored talk show host who grew up in a middle-class family in Brooklyn. It is believed that his family immigrated to Boston from County Kerry at the time of the potato famine. Though O'Briens also made a home for themselves in Canada, the O'Brien name and its many variations has been found in Newfoundland since the 18th century. John O'Brien came to St. John's around 1818. He was a dairy farmer who built Thimble Cottage on the outskirts of the town. Thimble Cottage is a rare example of the type of farmhouse built by Irish settlers on the outskirts of St. John's up until the mid-20th century. This building still stands with his descendants still living there. The O'Briens were also part of the Irish community in Antigonish County, Nova Scotia. The 1838 census noted the O'Briens in Tracadie and Dorchester townships. Michael J. O'Brien was a railway industrialist born in Lochaber in 1851, and his son Ambrose helped to form the Montreal Canadiens and the National Hockey League.
That's great, and thank you very much for that, Aisling. That's a fascinating count of the O'Briens, and not to forget how many castles they built in County Clare. They built a great deal of them, and we have Bunratty Castle, which they resided in, and the McNamara's built, but many more around there. Now, we need to move on to our other surname for today, which is Michael Reynolds. So, Michael, welcome to the Genealogy Radio Show, and tell us about the Reynolds.
So, the Reynolds family is an English name of Norse or Viking origin. The name Reynolds means son of Reynolds. The name is most commonly anglicised as Reynolds, but it also occurs as MacRonald or Gronald. Ragnall is the modern spelling from Scottish Gaelic, and almost all the Irish Reynolds are derived from the Gaelic name MacRonald, which means son of Ragnall, a form of the word Reginald, which is Latin, Fandel, or the French word Reynolds. And one of the earliest recorded MacRonalds was Askell MacRonald, who was the last king of Dublin that died in 1171. The name Reynolds appears to have been finally adopted by the families during the reign of Elizabeth I between 1558 and 1603. In England, the name is believed a variation of the ancient name of Ronald, the family originally having come from Normandy. The name is ultimately derived from the Old Norse Vognfald, a Latin borrowing of the word regal, which means advice, and fala, meaning ruler. It was also a surname of Irish Huguenots who came from France to evade religious persecution in the 1600s. Anglicised names of the Reynolds include MacRonald, MacRonan, and Reinagan. And throughout Ireland's rich history, the Reynolds family name was a prominent one, and even today, County Leitrim is the principal stronghold of the name, with nearly half the people in Ireland being so called in that area. Leitrim was founded in the early modern period, and this county encompasses the historic Gaelic territory of West Breffna, corresponding to the northern part of the county, and Muine Olish or Cormacrena Rain, correspond to the southern part. And famous surnames of Connacht, which was a province of where a lot of families were forced to settle during the plantations. The famous surnames along with the Reynolds include Brown, the Burkes, Dolan, Fitzmaurice, Hughes, Moran, Mulligan, Murphy, Nolan, O'Grady, O'Hara, O'Higgins, Smith, Tiernan, and Walsh. And there are so many variations for the name of Reynolds. There is Reynolds, Reynolds, Raynar, Reynolds, Reynolds, MacRonald, Gronald, MacRonald, MacRondell, MacRagnall, Reynolds, Reynolds, Ragnall, MacRaynall, Gronal, MacRonan, Ranalds, MacRon, Reinigan, Ronalds, Reynolds, Ronaldson, and Randallson. And the Reynolds family crest There is no single family coat of arms for the Reynolds clan, as there are multiple crests for the family that exist. This is because a coat of arms was given to the individuals and not just the surnames. So one of the most common recognised Reynolds family crests in Ireland consists of the colours yellow and green, which line at the centre of the coat of arms surrounded by shells. The gold-yellow colour signifies generosity, green represents joy, hope, and sometimes loyalty in love. The shells are the symbol of the protection of Providence, and the line is an emblem for deathless courage, and the family crest for MacRonald is identical to this one. The English Reynolds coat of arms is different to the MacRonald crest because it is made up of the colours blue and white with a small addition of gold or yellow, and instead of a line there is a black iron gate, which is most commonly associated with a security for a large castle. And some of the Reynolds crests have Latin phrases over them, and two of them include Jus meum trebor, which means I shall protect my rights or defend my rights, and the other motto is Favente Deo, meaning with God favouring. The Reynolds came to Ireland at the time of Strongbow during the 1200s, and these English invaders took the titles of Earls of Lisburn, Cavan and Mountmorris, and a later English invasion in the 17th century gave rise to the Reynolds from Devon of Reynolds Castle. And although Reynolds is an English name of Norse origin, the MacRonald families were the largest number of Reynolds that have been homegrown, probably in county of Leitrim in the territory of Moylish, and they had castles which included Lochscur and Rin. The early times the lands around Loch Rin in County Leitrim were owned and set up by the MacRonald clan. Sean MacGeown, or John of the Head, was so called for behind his rebellious clansmen, was their chief in the late 1500s. The Reynolds were strong supporters of James II in his campaign against William of Orange during the Williamite Wars. On scene, Turlough Reynolds, Lieutenant Morgan Reynolds and Captain Edward Reynolds were members of the Jacobite army and were nationalists. The next century saw the English taking over Leitrim and the Irish, including the MacRonalds, being gradually pushed out. A second exodus occurred at the time of the potato famine as well. Griffith's evaluation in 1847 reveals that there are 336 Reynolds households in Leitrim, the next highest being Longford with 75, Cavan with 58, and Offaly with only 33 between 1816 and 1913. The highest amount of Reynolds births was in Carrick and Shannon, with Mohill also being high at 1,288. Even so, nearly half the Reynolds in Ireland today come from Leitrim, and it was well known that the O'Rourke clan were their rivals, and then the Reynolds sept that existed in East Ulster were to be believed of English origin. And then the Reynolds did emigrate a lot, and one thing is shown is they all settled around Leitrim and Longford, and they can be rarely found in other parts of Ireland. However, a lot did emigrate abroad to countries such as England, where the first Reynolds name appeared when they were granted land after the Norman Conquest in 1066. William Villiers Rinaldi is recorded in the Domesday Book. A Reynolds family originally from Cambridgeshire transplanted themselves to Devon in the 14th century, where they were substantial landowners. They are described as men of great credit, fidelity and service to their kings, country and state in peace or war. Both the Reynolds and Reynolds names were to be found in Devon. Then the naval Reynolds came from Cornwall. They made their home in the late 18th century by the Pen y Trow, and Owen Reynolds was a yeoman farmer from Melcombe in Dorset and was 5 times their mayor in 1550s, and his nephew became the Earl of Essex and died a rich man in London in 1623. And the Reynolds in Kent are dated back from the 16th century and were descendants from the early immigrants to America later on. And George Reynolds in the 1840s got himself involved in the Chartist movement and founded the Reynolds weekly newspaper, which was radical and became quite popular until it ceased to exist in 1967. And the Reynolds also settled in South Africa. Two Devon farmers, Thomas and Lewis Reynolds, set off to Justina for South Africa to seek their fortunes, and they took them to sugar refining in Natal, and they were generally considered founders of the South Africa sugar industry. And then the Reynolds in Australia, there was Richard and Edward Reynolds, and they were convicted of petty theft in Chelmsford and transported in 1791. They kept a diary of the hardships of their journey, and they later surfaced in the Hawkesbury in New South Wales. And they died the petitioner arrived in this colony in the Atlantic in 1791 and had been free about 28 years. He endured all the hardships in which the infant colony could subject him, and had reared a family of 10 children to the habits and industry, which expanded the Reynolds clan in Australia. And then early rivals to Canada had been Empire loyalists such as William Reynolds, who left America after the Revolutionary War, and he became a cornet in the British Army and led a group of loyalists out of New York in 1796, and they settled then in Ontario. And then the English Reynolds in America came first, and there was a Robert and Mary Reynolds with their 4 children recorded in as early as 1630, and Christopher Reynolds from Gravesend, England, settled in Virginia in 1622, and they can be found in the Stephen Tillman's 1959 book, The Reynolds of Virginia and England. And currently today, there are 85,000 Reynolds family in the UK, mainly around Cambridgeshire, 76,000 in America, around Texas, and 32,000 elsewhere, such as Australia.
Well, that's absolutely fascinating. And what a wonderful account of our O'Brien and Reynolds surnames. And that concludes our genealogy radio show for today. We'll be back next week. We have an in-studio interview, and it'll be concerning Tobins and Maloney's and all records of County Clare. The following week after that, we'll be back with another 2 surnames on our surname series. So thank you very much, Ciara and Michael, for today. And the show will be podcast and repeated on Sundays at 2:00.